place my mobile. Just a second, madam, and then let me know.
Sir, your voice is breaking, sir. Conan?
Yeah, one minute, ma'am. I'll just place my mobile and then I'll let you know.
Yeah.
Is it okay, ma'am? Now the.
Yeah, now it's clear. It's okay. Yeah, your voice is also
Why?
audible, sir.
Why?
It's also audible. Okay, sir. Okay, is everything okay? Just I will stop your video and audio. We'll
Fine,
be
ma'am.
back. Okay, sir. Just for the sake.
Fine.
Otherwise, you can.
Fine.
Thank you, sir.
Professor, good afternoon. Professor, good afternoon. Professor, this is Collins. Could you hear me? Hello? நான் பேசுறது கேக்குதா? அவர் பேசுறாரா?
Hello, sir. This is Dharmadevi from Second College, sir. Please either increase your volume or unplug and insert the audio cable, sir. You are not audible. Yeah.
I'm not
Hello?
audible.
Yeah, now it's audible.
Oh, I'm audible now?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir. How are you?
Yeah, fine,
Yeah,
sir.
fine.
Sir, we'll have a check on your PowerPoint.
Oh, okay. Do you want me to do it from here?
Yes, sir. Is it okay for you?
Yeah, I can do it.
Yes, because your connection is quite stable. Only when there is a problem, we'll take the next option. Otherwise, you will be very comfortable when you present, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Are you able to see it?
Metaphors, Tonga literature.
Come again?
Metaphors, Tonga literature. That's the page. Use of symbols in indigenous literature.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, sir.
You're able to see it?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Present.
Okay.
Perfect, sir.
Thank you so much.
Yes, sir. Let us stay online while other participants join us.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you, sir. sir. So we'll start within few minutes, sir. Severus, sir.
Yes, ma'am. I'm ready, ma'am. I'm ready. Am I
Okay, sir.
audible?
Okay, sir. Yes, sir. Audible, sir. Okay, sir. Kindly be ready, sir. Dr. Yuvraj.
You're on.
Sir, shall we start?
Yes, I'm ready.
Yes, sir, you can start. Yes, sir, we'll start.
Shall I start?
Sir, yes, yes.
Good afternoon to one and all present here, and a warm welcome to the speaker of the session, Dr. Wilson Silingwe. If one would take a look at the variety of topics included for the international conference, I'm sure they would be reminded of this famous quote from Antony and Cleopatra when Inoubaba says, "Age cannot wither her, nor custom stale her infinite variety." Yes, we have variety of topics included, and to add on to this, today we have amidst us Dr. Wilson Silingwe, who will be delivering a lecture on indigenous literature and media and literature. I would now like to introduce Dr. Wilson Silingwe to the learned audience. Dr. Wilson Silingwe is currently the Executive Director of Zambia Institute for Tourism and Hospitality Studies. Prior to this, he was the director of the same institute. Dr. Silingwe has been in the realm of academics for the past 12 years, having served as senior lecturer, head of department for journalism, and dean of humanities and social sciences of Rasungu University. Dr. Silingwe holds a Bachelor of Mass Communication from the University of Zambia, a Master of Arts in Communication from the University of South Africa, a Master of Arts and a doctoral degree in leadership from Trinity Graduate School and Theological Seminary in Indiana, United States of America. Currently, Dr. Silingwe is pursuing two academic programs, Master of Mass Communication at the University of Zambia and a Doctor of Philosophy in Communication at the University of South Africa. Dr. Silingwe has also published a book entitled Culture, Communication, and Intercultural Interaction. Without further delay, I request Dr. Silingwe to start the session. Over to Dr. Silingwe.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that very wonderful welcome and introduction. I'm very glad to be here on this platform. I've enjoyed the sessions that I've joined in to listen, and it's been quite an interesting journey to be part of this. Really, it's been very exciting. And greetings from Zambia. I hope that all those that are listening to me right now are able to hear. We are glad to be part of this program. So without delaying, allow me to go into my presentation. Let me just pick my presentation. All right. Thank you so much. We are looking at indigenous literature but specifically we'll be talking about the uses of symbols in indigenous literature. And to basically deal with this topic, I am going to look specifically at the Tonga people of Zambia, looking at their indigenous literature and how they use symbols in their literature. So this presentation basically will flow like this. Firstly, I will do a very quick self-disclosure, and then we will go into the objectives of the presentation. We will then look at the definitions and go into the indigenous literature of the Tonga people. And within that segment, we'll look at metaphors, we'll look at allegories, we'll look at objectives, symbols, and then finally, we will conclude. So I must be quick to state that actually this was collaborative work between myself and my wife, Dr. AC Lungwe, although she wasn't able to be part of this presentation. In terms of academic background, she comes from the area of sociology and social work. She serves at Rusangi University, obviously teaching those subjects, and she also serves as director of the campus in Lusaka. As the introduction was done, I have mainly taught in the areas of journalism and communication. I do adjunct lecturing at Rusangi University as well, and then I serve as director for the Zambia Institute for Tourism and Hospitality Studies. As husband and wife, we have done a lot of collaborative work. So far, we've produced about 8 peer-reviewed journal articles. We've done 1 chapter in a book, and we've done magazine articles, about 4 of them so far. To quickly run through the objectives of this presentation are twofold. Firstly, we are looking at the symbols of indigenous literature, and basically this presentation wants to demonstrate or to show that indigenous literature of the Tonga people is indeed quite beautiful, because the symbols that are being used there are actually intended to augment and to make the symbols of literature, the symbols of literature look good. And then secondly, in demonstrating the symbolisms in the Tonga literature, we are actually suggesting, or we are demonstrating the fact that this is actually a very beautiful culture. So I will quickly go through some of the definitions of symbolism. The first definition of symbolism suggests that actually symbolism, are artistic and poetic expressions that are used sometimes directly or sometimes indirectly to articulate certain ideas, mystical ideas, events, and also state of mind. Symbolism sometimes are used as, this evidence that demonstrates people's lives, that marks, demonstrates location and also abstract ideas. And these are communicated through literal means. We do know that symbolism or symbols exist everywhere. And this is something that, we can actually figure out, or we can garner as we look around. And symbolisms sometimes are figures of speech that are used, that the author may use, sometimes wanting to create a certain mood or a certain ambience as they are communicating, in their literature work. Symbols are very useful because they help to enhance the quality of writing. Symbols are used to make the literal work richer. Symbols do add color to literary works. Symbols help to make meaning of the work that has been written deeper. And they also help to beautify the environment and also to beautify the culture from which they come. So there are various types of symbols that we can look at. Okay, throughout literature, we find several types of symbols. And let me just demonstrate, or let me just show some of them. The first type of symbol that we can look at is a metaphor. A metaphor is a comparison between 2 often unlike items, that do use words like or as. For instance, if you say time is money, basically what you are saying is the time and money are two different things, but because they are used in one simple statement, you are suggesting that, you see, for instance, time is as valuable as money. So when you look at the value of time, you equate it to the value of money, and then you can say that time is money. That's what we call a metaphor. Then the second type of symbol that we find is what we call an allegory. An allegory basically is an extension of a metaphor. But you see, an allegory can actually be an entire story or a poem or a book. And these are used as symbols that demonstrate, or explain certain things from the literal work. For instance, I'm sure most of us have come across the book Animal Farm. When we were in high school, we must have read the book Animal Farm by George Orwell. And this is a story that depicts animals in a farm and what goes on within that particular farm. But you see, behind that whole story is this movement towards the Russian Revolution. So the animals in there are basically representing the challenges of greed and lack of concern for others, and how these impact a revolution. That's an allegory. The other one is called a simile. Basically, a simile is an explicit denotation of a comparison. A simile often uses either the word like or as. For instance, if you say, this person is as strong as an ox, okay, or as clear as a crystal, or as clean as a whistle, as brave as a lion, as busy as a bee. So all those are statements that would refer to as similes. These are part of what we are referring to when we talk about symbolism. The fourth type of symbol is what we call the archetype. Okay, archetypes are basically plots of a piece of fiction, or or the center element of a piece of fiction that recurs in cross-cultural myths. For instance, we all do know that every time the devil is depicted or is shown in literature, both in word or in picture, he's demonstrated as this cleft-hooved, red-horned humanoid, basically with a tail and very scary looking. And Jesus in literature is always demonstrated with this blonde-haired, blue-eyed, fine-looking gentleman with a very peaceful face. So those are what we call archetypes, and they are taken as, symbolisms that have, existed over a long period of time, and they're accepted as part of literature. Then the fifth type of symbolism is what we call objects. Basically, these are physical items that are taken as examples of symbolism. And we can actually pick out some examples from there. We do know universally around the world that the dove is always, used as a symbol of peace. Wherever you see a picture of a dove, what comes into mind is the fact that you're trying to demonstrate peace. A red rose often is a depiction of love or romance. A broken mirror may symbolize separation. A cross, wherever you find a building with a cross, obviously is related to the Christian religion. A horse is a symbol of agility. A lion is a symbol of bravery. So these are some of the objects that we use, in symbolism to try and explain or to show, what is being meant. What are some of the traits of symbols? Number one, symbols add levels of meaning and also create depth in text. Secondly, symbols lend a universal meaning and a magnificence to the theme and characters of a literary work. Number three, symbols stimulate the interest of readers as they interact with the work that they are reading. Number four, symbols are keys to the writer's mind and intent. The number five, symbols engage readers as they offer, the reader an opportunity to get into what they are reading, in a bit more depth. What is the importance of symbols, you may ask? Number one, symbols are used to produce an impact, which is accomplished by attaching additional meaning to an action, object, or name. Number two, symbols take something that is usually concrete and associates or affixes it to something else in order to give it a new and more significant meaning. Now, after having defined the symbols, let me quickly just look at indigenous literature. Indigenous literature basically is often a piece of writing that is done by an indigenous person. Usually indigenous literature talks about traditions and their relationships to nature and so forth. Indigenous literature often tackles difficult topics within a particular tradition or a particular culture. The number four, indigenous literature often is written with strong emotions that are attached to the work. Indigenous literature is important because normally it's an integral part of a particular culture, and generations do learn about their culture and their history through indigenous literature. And finally, indigenous literature actually is a useful tool for entertainment within a particular community or within a particular culture. So for this particular presentation, I'll focus on the indigenous literature for the Tonga people. As a way to introduce the Tonga people, of course, Zambia, as you know, currently we have about 73 different tribal groupings, and within that 73 group of tribes in Zambia, the Tongas have existed, as history shows, within Zambia or within the geographical area called Zambia for the last many, many years, I think as way back as the 7th century. And Tongas are known to be pastoralists, and these are individuals who keep cattle and they attach wealth to their cattle. Generally, Tongas are polygamists. They live in communal and hospital environments, and they are found in the southern province of Zambia. So if you look at the map of Zambia, you find at the bottom there, the southern province of Zambia is where exactly the Tongas do come from. And that's a typical village, of Tonga people. Generally, they live in communities and they'll have uncles and aunties and brothers and sisters and grandfathers and grandmothers within that same locality. So now to get into the indigenous literature of the Tonga people, I identified 3 key books and 1 musical album from which I was able to pick, or we're able to pick some works that we are trying to analyze in this particular presentation. The first one is a book called Mugandege. It was written by a gentleman called J.B. Mwemba back in 1966. The second book is called Gabuja Uleta Tunji. It was written by a Mr. C.M. Mainza back in 1956. Then the third one is called Ogunonkulu Saga. It was written by a gentleman called Mr. S. Hangala. This was written actually in 1975. Then the fourth one is an album written by the same gentleman who wrote the third book, and it's called Aunkama Kwacha, and this was done in 1976. These pieces of work are actually very interesting because they have a lot of symbolisms in them, and this basically explains the symbolisms that are used in Tonga literature. So with regard to Tonga indigenous literature, I'll break it down in this format. We'll start by looking at the metaphors that are used in Tonga literature. And you bear with me, I'll have to use specific Tonga words, and then I'll give the literal translation of those particular words. The first one that we're able to get from these materials that we were referring to is called Wagadi Legelela Wagawa. The literal translation of this particular statement is, he who let him or herself down fell. Now, if you pick the word fell literally means falling down. But in this particular metaphor, it does not necessarily mean falling down. It means failure. Because among the Tonga people, laziness is not entertained, laziness is not allowed. So laziness and lazy people are expected not to be part of the community. In other words, this particular community does not welcome lazy people. These are people who deal with cattle keeping, and then they are also farmers. They tend to do a lot of physical work. So that particular metaphor is used so that whoever gets to understand the Tonga culture knows that you are getting into a community where people, are really, really into hard work. The second metaphor that I want to give is called Joma Manu Wabula Manu Jaguria. Basically, what this means is that, you see, with Choma, I'll explain what Choma means. With Choma, be clever, otherwise Choma will swallow you. Now, Choma is a town right in the center of Southern Province where the Tonga people are found. Currently, it's a provincial capital. Now, in the colonial days, it was actually considered a bustling small metropolis, so to speak. And this is where people from all over the villages would go and meet over there, take their produce from the farms and sell them. Now, what they started discovering was that, you see, as the villagers are visiting this particular town, sometimes they have situations where perhaps they are attacked and the money from the produce is stolen and so on and so forth. So now they developed a statement that when it comes to Choma, the town Choma, you have to be clever. Otherwise, if you are not clever, thieves will attack you, they will steal from you, and you lose everything. So basically, Choma will swallow you. That's what it means. So that's another metaphor from the Tonga indigenous literature. The third metaphor that I want to provide is called Wagebelwa Nzoga Muwina. Now, literally, it means she was admired by snakes from their holes. It's quite weird, isn't it? This statement is borrowed from the book that we were getting called Mogandege. This particular book is a depiction of a very beautiful Tonga girl that every time she would walk, literally snakes would come out of their holes to admire her. They felt to bite her because she's so beautiful. And yet within this particular book, what the author is communicating is not necessarily the beauty of this girl, but he's talking about the beauty of the Tonga culture. That this particular culture is so beautiful that the Tonga people need to uphold it, and they don't need to abandon it because it's very beautiful and they have no need to go elsewhere. So basically, that's the point I was trying to make, that you see, you have this very beautiful girl, and then she's so beautiful that as she's passing, snakes are admiring and looking at her. The fourth metaphor that I want to pick from the Tonga indigenous literature is called Gabuja Uleta Tunji. When you translate that literally, it is saying tomorrow brings many different things. Now, this particular statement is actually a warning for people, as you exist in your community, wherever you are, in India, in Bangladesh, in Cuba, in Dubai, wherever, in Zambia. We believe that, a person is supposed to be helpful or kind to other people. Now, when you refuse to help somebody who is in need, what that means is that you, when your turn comes to seek help, nobody will help you. And therefore, the Tonga people coined this statement to say that, you see, you might have something today, but tomorrow something else will happen. So it's a statement to remind people that you live in a community, and because you live in a community, you need to be kind, you need to be helpful to other people. So that's the meaning of that statement. Tomorrow brings many different things. Then the fifth metaphor that we are looking at is saying, Muzoga ulyagwe endenda. Literally, that means a snake eats by moving around, okay? A snake eats by moving around. This suggests that in order for you to achieve anything, you need to move around. You cannot achieve anything by sitting down. Now, if you take it from the traditional setup, maybe in the rural areas, men, for instance, go out to hunt. There are these small animals that men go out to hunt, say a daika or whatever. Now, if you are sitting at home just enjoying, your rest under a shed, you will not get the opportunity to kill a daika and bring it over. But you see, when you move around, you are able to have the opportunity to find a daika, for instance, and bring it over home for children to eat. So basically, that statement is suggesting that, you see, in order for you to achieve anything, you need to be able to venture out. And that's what that statement means. The other statement that I want us to look at in terms of metaphors is called Womba Ulyemalero. This statement literally translates be soft, or that word soft could actually imply humble. Be humble, be soft in order for you to enjoy wealth. So among Tonga people, pride is vehemently discounted and is basically dismissed, abhorred. So within that particular community, proud people are not wanted and they are not allowed to share in the wealth of the community. So if you're an individual that is known to be proud, you are definitely shunned. And when elderly people are counseling younger people, they are advised to ensure that they are humble, and that, you see, by being humble, they are able now to venture in the sharing of the wealth of the community. That's what that statement means. All right, let's move on to allegories. We've tackled metaphors, we move on to allegories. And we said that an allegory could actually be an entire book, an entire story, and this is a story that is trying to communicate something hidden behind the story. The example that I want to bring out very quickly from the Tonga indigenous literature is a book that I highlighted called Magandege. This is a book that depicts this beautiful girl from a village who all men want, excuse me, the man is missing there. All men want and all women literally hate. Because the author of the book says that, you see, married women were so afraid of her that she would take their husbands, and single women were so envious of her that they wanted, to take up her looks, to look like her. But you see, I mean, the storyline really is that, you see, when this particular young lady, would walk, for instance, to the well to go and draw water, snakes would literally come out of their holes and admire her. And in the story there, there's a part of the headmaster of a local school who is so steered on, so adamant, intending to get this little girl called Mugandege and divorce his wife. And all the boys within the village are after her and everyone is admiring her. But you see, with full of romance as this particular story might sound when you read it, the bigger picture or the hidden scheme within this particular book is that of, like I was highlighting, is that of a typical Tonga village, where, I mean, it's typical Tonga culture where, the author is suggesting that this culture is so beautiful that other people admire and so on and so forth. And by writing that book, this particular author is trying to imply that Tonga people must be proud of their culture and they must hold on to it. They shouldn't allow any foreign cultures to dilute it. All right, let's move on to, we've tackled metaphors, we've tackled allegories. Now let's look at some of the objects that are used in the communication of Tonga indigenous literature. The first word that I want to look at to refer to objects is called mambwindi. Basically, it is suggesting an ample behind. Okay, in everyday language, the word that is used in Tonga language is called matago. Now, when you use the word mambwindi, it's basically you're suggesting an amplified, backside that just goes beyond buttock. So basically, in Tonga literature, when a word like that is used, it's like you're trying to glorify or to express beyond just the regular statement of buttocks. You're going beyond that. And please, you'll excuse my language. I was just trying to explain the culture of the Tonga people. Then the second statement that can be used or can be garnered to demonstrate the objects of symbolism within indigenous Tonga literature is called musuntewa masusu. You know, for those who've done farming, for instance, corn farming or maize farming, at harvest time, you go around cutting the stalks and you heap them together within the farm or within the field. And then you heap them together so that when it comes now to separating the corn from the stalks, you are doing it from one central place, not really walking around in the field. And this is done traditionally in an environment where you don't have combined harvesters. So within the Tonga people, it is believed that a woman should have hair, you know, as huge as that, you know, heap of corn stalks or sheaf. So basically, when they use the word musuntawa masusu, they are trying to suggest that, you see, a woman is supposed to have a full complement of hair on their head, for like the picture, you know, is showing. The third symbol that I want to use, the third object that I want to use is what they call jisiyo jiwotu. Basically, with that statement, you're talking about the dark people of Southern Province, the Tonga people. They will say nicely dark, that this young lady is nicely dark. So by that, all right, thank you. I think I had gone off a bit. Okay, so again, with that, what we are saying is that, you see, they are suggesting that, you see, Tonga people are dark and they must be proud of their darkness. The other object that can be identified for a symbol is what they call menso atuba mbulimugupa. Basically, they are saying the eyes of a woman must be as white as milk. So again, that's another symbol that is used, you know, in terms of objects of symbolism in Tonga indigenous literature. The other symbol or object that the objects that are used in Tonga indigenous literature is called mulaga ulwela mbuli buji amogupa. Basically, they are saying their language is so sweet. It is as sweet as milk and honey. So when they use that statement, they are basically taking that much pride in their language. And, you know, we find this statement in Exodus 3 verse 8. Perhaps that's where they borrowed it from. You know, it's like you have a glass of milk and then you put honey and drink. It's really, really sweet. So that's basically what they are saying, that, you see, their language is so sweet. It's as sweet as milk and honey. Among the Tonga people, one of the things that I actually take so much pride in is wealth. And with the Tonga people, the wealth that they talk about is cattle. So wealth is, cattle is considered as a symbol of wealth. Among the Tonga people, it does not matter the size of your bank account. It does not matter whether you drive an expensive car or not. It doesn't matter whether you have beautiful houses or not. If you don't have cattle, you are considered poor. So within the Tonga indigenous literature, every time a cow or cattle are mentioned, they are basically referring to a symbol of wealth. I do know one elderly gentleman, very wealthy in terms of cattle, over 3,000 cattle, heads of cattle at his homestead. Basically could not buy shoes. He was just walking around in flip-flops, didn't even want to buy a vehicle, but he holds on to his cattle as a symbols of wealth. All right, so we conclude our presentation by saying that this presentation basically was tackling matters to do with the symbols, you know, that are used in Tonga indigenous literature. And in this presentation, we demonstrated that these symbols not only make literal works very attractive, but they also make, you know, the point that, you see, the Tonga culture is beautiful, and it's demonstrated or it's seen from the manner in which symbolisms are used in their particular literature. Thank you very much. And I guess the host now will allow us to go to questions, and I will attempt to answer them. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson, for giving us a comprehensive view of the role of symbols, similes, and metaphors with reference to Tonga literature. Dr. Wilson, we have a couple of questions from the audience. The first question is from Dr. Sujata Menon, and her question is, in most myths and folk tales, we have tricksters, like for example, Anansi the spider. In Zambian folk tales and myths, are they tricksters? Are they seen as good with an element of mischief, or are they seen more as evil?
Well, thank you for that very interesting question. I think like in any culture or in any community, really, there are people that don't mean well. Of course, I was mentioning that Tonga people are very much into keeping of cattle. There are cattle rustlers there. There are people who are considered rogues or rascals who go around trying to deny, owners of these heads of cattle their own cattle, and by stealing it. And then, of course, depending on the extent to which that particular mischief goes, it goes beyond just being tricksters. It now becomes, outright crookedness. Of course, some people will end up in prison. But in the years ago, before the organization, that was brought in by the colonial government, the local people had their own way in which some of these crimes were handled. But now, of course, they are handed over to police, and then the legal system obviously takes over. But yes, of course, they are tricksters, they are crooks, they are criminals within these local communities. So if I got the question correct, I think that would be the answer.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Wilson. And there's one more question. How does Tonga culture respond to foreign literary and cultural influences?
I think the bridging gap really has been, if I was going to take Zambia, for instance, we have these traditional communities, particularly in the rural areas, and then you have these cosmopolitan communities within urban areas, and these urban people are influenced by Western culture. So the tendency really is to bridge the gap. For instance, I'm working in the urban areas, and once in a while I do travel to the village to go and see my mother, for instance, and you see there's a bit of a clash between the kind of lifestyle that, say, my mother, my parents live in the village, and the lifestyle that I live within the urban areas. And some, in a way, that influence ultimately goes, because what you are finding now is that in the rural areas, there's now satellite television. Within the rural areas, they're able to watch CNN, they're able to watch BBC, and so on and so forth. And meaning that even foreign literary works, of course, are reaching the rural areas, and the level of literacy is now rising. So in a way, the traditional setup of the local people in the rural communities is getting a bit watered down by the influence of Western culture, and these urbanites are the ones that are tending to dilute, because as I'm living in the city, I'm adopting the Western culture, Western style of living, and I go to the village. When I visit my mother, I want to continue watching CNN, then I'll set up the satellite television there, and so on and so forth. And before you know it, the rural area is slowly getting diluted, by Western influence.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Wilson. I think there's one more question. I think that the topic is very interesting. Would you like to take one more question, Dr. Wilson?
Absolutely.
That's a question from Dr. Kathiresan. Do you find any reflection of Tonga culture in any other culture of Zambia? Have you made an attempt of comparing it with another culture?
Thank you very much. When I was beginning the presentation, I indicated that, you see, within Zambia, we have somewhat about 73 tribal groupings. And within these 73 tribal groupings, when you actually look at it, you find that the key or the major ones are probably 7. And within these 7, there are splinter, sub-cultural groups or sub-tribal groups. There's a a connection with most of them, because when you look historically, most of the tribal groupings that exist in Zambia were actually coming to traits. There's in Zambia, there's what we call Bantu Botatwe. Basically, you're talking about the Tongas, the Lenges, and the Solis as well. These are people who come and they have certain similar traits or similar characteristics. But then there are others that are a bit on the extreme side who were, for instance, coming from the southern side of Africa, and they came in with a totally different cultural setup. But otherwise, it's a very interesting suggestion to look at how these various cultures do compare. And I think it would give a very interesting research study opportunity there.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Wilson. I think now I request Dr. Wilson to deliver his lecture on media and literature.
Thank you so much, Professor. Let me pull down this particular presentation and go to the other one. Sorry, 1 minute. All right, is my slide visible?
Yes, sir. Yes.
All right, thank you. So for the next presentation, again, is collaborative work. In this one, we are looking at, print media production in Zambia as works of literature. And the question is, are they beautiful letters or not? So in terms of presentation outline, we're basically going to, I've done the self-disclosure, so no need to go back there. We'll look at the objectives, introduction, definitions, and the challenge of the definition of the word literature. And then we'll look at quality journalism and breaking it down to look at loyalty to citizens, truthfulness, as well as monitoring the rich and the powerful. And then we are going to conclude. In terms of objective for this particular presentation, here's the overarching objective. In this particular presentation, we want to critique the state of Zambia media, print media as such, and look at the products or what comes out of the print media in Zambia, and to see whether they constitute what we call beautiful letters. And this statement, beautiful letters, was basically projected by Egerton. We'll see what we're talking about. All right, so to start with, I want to quote a gentleman called Matthew Arnold. He existed between 1822 and 1888. He was an English school inspector, he was a poet, he was a cultural critic, and he said, journalism is literature in a hurry, and that's a very packed statement. So having said that, or having qualified journalism as literature in a hurry, this particular presentation is going to interrogate the quality of print media production in Zambia. And we see how it relates to literature. So the question is the quality of writing within the print media fraternity in Zambia up to the standard that warrants it to indeed be deemed literature? By way of definition, we do know that media basically are communication tools that are used to store and to deliver information. And within the media definition, really, we have these categories. Media can be broken down into print, it can be broken down into broadcasting, it can be broken down into advertising media, and also digital media, which is the internet. It includes social media as well. Journalism is an occupation that produces and distributes reports on current or past events. This is done through various media platforms, print, broadcast, internet, and so on and so forth. And then literature is a collection of written works. More restrictively, literature is writing that is considered to be of, in an art form, or single writing that is deemed to have artistic or intellectual value, and sometimes deploys language in ways that differ from ordinary usage. Within Western Europe, prior to the 18th century, literature denoted all books and all forms of writing. And then a more restricted sense of the term emerged around the Romantic period, in which the thinking was that actually literature is supposed to be something that is imaginative, or a writing that is imaginative. The Romantic era, or what we call Romanticism, basically refers to an artistic, literary, musical, and intellectual movement that originated in Europe somewhere around the 18th century, according to the Encyclopedia Britannica. Contemporary debates over what constitutes literature can be seen as returning to the older and more inclusive notions to include both popular and minority genres, as well as canonical works. Sorry about that. Now, when you investigate, you discover that actually there's a bit of a challenge in terms of consensus on the definition of literature, because some people have argued that anything can be literature as long as it's written. Others have said that anything that is universally deemed as literature has the potential to be excluded, since there we bring in the issues of value judgment. And value judgments, of course, we can agree that change over time. Now, here's what Egerton says. He says that the value judgment definition of literature considers it to cover exclusively those writings that possess high quality or distinction, forming what is called belle. It's a French word, basically, forming what is called belle traditional. Belle basically implies beautiful letters or fine writing. So due to the lack of agreement on the definition of literature, allow us, for a bit to critique journalistic works from within the print media in Zambia, using Egerton's standpoint of beautiful letters. The question is, are print media in Zambia as works of literature producing what we're referring to as beautiful letters? Okay, because we've said actually beautiful letters in the contemporary study of literature are deemed to fall within the category of writing that may exclude, such artistic works as fiction, poetry, and drama. We are basically talking about, writings that are talking about non-fictitious, issues or matters. But then there's a statement by Lord Kemps, who existed between 1698 and 1782, and this is what he says, that of course, there are many voices that are critiquing the whole concept of beautiful letters and dismiss the concept. But in actual fact, beautiful letters refers to writing that has beauty, sublimity, propriety, and also wit. Now, for this particular presentation, we are focusing on propriety because it refers to writing that is modest, respectable, decent, and of good manners, as we refer to literature materials that are produced. So therefore, the focus for this presentation is a critique of the production of print media in Zambia, and here we're referring to both public and private. I just want you to note this, that there's a bit of a challenge in terms of adequacy of literature on Zambia around the subject that we are discussing today. And therefore, a more scientific study, has been proposed and is underway to interrogate further the quality of the print media production as works of literature in Zambia. So what we are talking about today is basically a stimulant to a further study. All right, let's look at the quality of journalism. And here we can state that, universally it's agreed that journalistic works are supposed to be truthful, accurate, objective, impartial, fair, and also with some level of public accountability. And that's what the Associated Press statement of ethics for managing editors state. But here is what Kovac and Rosencio in their book, The Elements of Journalism, brought. And basically, they are narrowing what Associated Press has stated into 3 key areas. And these are, number one, that journalistic works are supposed to be a demonstration of loyalty to the citizens. Secondly, they should be able to tell the truth. And thirdly, they should be independent enough to be able to monitor the powerful and the rich in society, including individuals and institutions. Okay, so having spelled out those qualities of good and tasty journalism, so allow me now to interrogate the quality of print media in Zambia to establish the conformity to the tenets of quality journalism, and therefore to see whether they conform to the principle of beautiful letters, because we're talking about propriety. Okay, and that's what the 2 gentlemen propose. So the first one is loyalty to citizens. The question is, to what extent is the print media in Zambia loyal to the citizens for whom they are writing or for whom they write? Or is there loyalty to those who pay their bills or to those who pay their operations? Here's a study that I and my compatriots did. And in this particular study, we speak of the challenge of lack of independence within the media fraternity in Zambia. And it has been discovered that actually this is a driving force, that pushes the media houses to be more loyal to the owners of the means of production and not to the citizens or the people for whom they write. So broadly speaking, really, there's a general lack of concern and the lack of allegiance towards the citizens for whom the media is supposed to be serving. Okay, it's been observed that actually the media in Zambia generally tends to be more allegiant to owners of finance, to the owners and financiers than to the citizens for whom they serve. And here is an article that came out in the newspaper 7th of February 2019, and I decided to withhold the name of the newspaper. We did not seek permission, but anyway. So in the article that was written by this gentleman, he talks about the need to add depth to news within journalistic works in Zambia, and this is his quotation directly. He says, in a developing country like Zambia, information is key to both economic and political growth. The general citizenry are denied the information they need to make informed decisions on government policy and other very important matters. It has been observed, for instance, from one of the big newspapers in Zambia, that you see the owners of the newspaper have more power than the people for whom the newspaper is serving. I'll give an example. In the year 2011, when Zambia held a general election, the gentleman who was in the opposition, called Mr. Michael Sata, fought very hard and campaigned. On election day, there was a big banner within the newspaper, that particular newspaper, that says Sata can never be president. Now, when you make such a statement, never, you are suggesting that you know something and that this will never happen. Okay. So when you read that particular statement, you can tell that, you see, this particular newspaper was demonstrating or was extending its allegiance to the president who was ruling then, and not to the masses. Because when this story goes out to the masses, what they are reading is that whatever happens, this person can never be president. But a few days later, when the results were announced, the newspaper was very quick and produced this very big screaming newspaper that Sata is president. Now, how can you say Sata is president 3 or so days later you are saying Sata can never be president? So you can actually see that their loyalty is to the owners of the newspaper and not to communicate what is a correct thing. The other newspaper that we can talk about is the Must. The Must newspaper, around the time when the elections were held in 2011, used to be called the Post. And this particular newspaper was a vehement critic of government. And they were there, particularly projecting one particular candidate, and this is the one that I'm referring to as Sata. And they pushed and wrote about him and advertised him and so on and so forth. And they criticized government, criticized the sitting president that time. By the moment their candidate won, the newspaper switched completely took a 180 turnaround and started supporting government. So again, you start wondering whether they really are loyal to their readers or not. The second element to quality journalism is truthfulness. Basically, with truthfulness, we are saying that, you see, facts are supposed to be conveyed in truth, and the newspaper is supposed to be truthful. So the question is the print media in Zambia consistent with truthfulness in their writing? Here is what one gentleman wrote called Jokoto in his book, An Issue-Based Journalism Handbook. This is basically a book that talks about, you know, the journalism fraternity or profession within Zambia. And he talks about the challenges of upholding ethical standards within the journalism fraternity in Zambia. And the current president of Zambia, speaking at the eve of the World Press Freedom Day on May 2nd, 2020, you know, openly bemoaned the fact that the country had witnessed a great decline in ethical standards within the journalism profession because there was a lot of production of untruths and half-truths. So the report on the state of media in Zambia and the report on the press freedom and regulation in Zambia also bemoan the state of the media in Zambia, where morality and ethical conduct among the professionals have been sacrificed, you see, or have been sacrificed on the altar of expediency and a desire for gain. The third point is independent monitoring. Are media in Zambia independent enough to be able to monitor the rich and the powerful, those who wield political and economic power? Here is what our study showed. Our study showed that there is some form of interference from those who owned the media entities or financed operations through donations, grants, and advertising. Further, we report that in most instances, meddling directly was actually impacting negatively on the operations of these various media concerns, that professionalism was sacrificed because of people wanting expediency, aggrandizement, and also financial gain and support. The report on press freedom and regulation in Zambia states that most journalists and media professionals in Zambia are susceptible to manipulation, and that's because they operate under very difficult economic situations. Their conditions of work are poor, and therefore they are vulnerable to corruption, you know, by those who are rich and those who are powerful. So most media in Zambia, as some researchers will demonstrate, you know, exist mainly for making money and not necessarily to serve the communities or the citizens. Thus, most media entities in Zambia do not have the means, nor do they have the will to monitor the rich and the powerful as long as the media entity is generating revenue. So let's summarize our talk very quickly in this manner. Matthew Arnold said journalistic works, you know, are pieces of literature, although in a hurry, that we agree. And that literature can be anything written, can be anything written, including books, magazines, newsprints, and so on and so forth, and that we agree. It follows, therefore, that journalistic works, obviously, that are produced by various newspapers or various print media concerns in Zambia are pieces of literature, are literature works, but the question is it quality literature? Because Egerton basically introduces the element of beautiful letters. And with this perspective, then we must look at the distinction and quality of these particular pieces of work and whether they're actually qualifying for propriety. It follows, therefore, that the journalists must seek good taste, decency, and proper morals as they are doing their work, because they must be loyal to the people, they must tell the truth, they must be independent. And what we've discovered from the presentation is that these things are not really happening right now within the print media circles in Zambia. Okay, that's what we've discovered, that you see the element of beautiful letters is still missing within the fraternity of the print media in Zambia, and therefore they fall short of the definition of literature of value or beautiful letters. All right, I think that's where we end for this particular presentation. Thank you so much. I'm available for questions.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Wilson, for throwing wonderful light on some of the most significant issues pertaining to journalism. And again, we have some questions. There's a question from one Mr. Jamil Muthu. Is it easy to learn a Zambia language or difficult?
Um, I'll give you one quick example. For instance, in the earlier presentation, I was talking about the Tonga culture. With the Tonga culture, I mean, with the Tonga language, it's not difficult to learn the Tonga language, but the challenge that you'll have is pronunciation. Okay. Part of my heritage on my mother's side, I'm Tonga, and I know how people struggle to learn how to pronounce words correctly, because Tonga is spoken more like, maybe like Japanese. There are certain intonations, there are certain points that you have to hit, and you have to hit very hard. So they tend to be a bit difficult to learn in terms of, like a foreigner coming to learn the language is a bit difficult. But other languages like Bemba, for instance, they're quite easy to learn. So anyway, and again, it depends on how good your tongue is. There are some people who are very quick to learn languages, others tend to be a bit slow to learn. So it really depends on how strong you are in terms of knowing, I mean, like learning languages and learning very fast.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Wilson. There's one more question. What practical measures do you suggest to ensure the quality journalism to print media of Zambia, despite the reality that it would like to survive?
Yeah. Yeah. Without being political, I think the problem that is there is that there's this, quite some serious fear towards the rich and powerful. And by this, I'm referring to, for instance, politicians. I think that if seriousness is accredited to the media fraternity and politics stands aside, so that these media entities are able to operate in an environment that is free, they're able to run business, they're able to do all these things without this interference from the political arena, then I think it becomes a bit easy. One of the things that I can state very quickly is that, you see, part of the survival of most media houses, including newspapers, is that they depend on government mainly for advertising. So what that means is that, you see, if you stand in opposition to government, for instance, maybe you stand to be disadvantaged. That's the first thing. The second thing is, when you look at the private sector, most of the individuals that are running these entities are just in there for money, for business. So they will tend to make the conditions of the reporters or journalists so bad, and then they maximize on their own profits to the point that they are not able to recruit professionals in their institutions. So they will get maybe fresh graduates from colleges or people who are not trained at all, because the law really doesn't inhibit anyone from practicing as a journalist, whether trained or not trained. So again, you find the element of lack of professionalism, because you have people who are working in these entities who are not trained to work in there. So if those two elements can be attended to, then I think there is hope for the journalism fraternity in the country.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Wilson. I think we have a couple of questions. Would you be? I'm sure you would be interested to answer them. There's a question from Dr. Vasuki. Is there any intervention of Zambian politics which is reflected in media and literature?
There have been attempts, yes, there have been attempts, and the attempts continue. Where, for instance, musicians, if I was to take an example of those kinds of artistic works, musicians will produce certain songs, and these songs are basically trying to communicate to the politicians that, there's certain things that they should let go of, and to also promote matters of democracy and so on and so forth. So those are basically trying to communicate the thought that it's important that politics stands aside and allows the media to do its work, so that we promote democracy, because as you know, the media is considered the fourth estate. If you have the three wings of government, legislature, executive, and the judiciary, and then you have the media that watches over the three. You remember the 3 points that I was talking about. The third one is monitoring the rich and the powerful, and here you're talking about individuals, and you're also talking about institutions. So the fourth estate, which is the media, basically is supposed to ensure or to watch over. That's why media is sometimes called watchdog. It's supposed to watch over the behaviors of the other three and to make sure that if there's anything that is not right, then the media is supposed to back, it's supposed to alert, it's supposed to bring out. You remember the story of the Watergate scandal in the US? The unveiling of the Watergate scandal was basically because of the Washington Post and those two particular reporters, Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein. So they ensured that the story was coming out, and they kept on bringing out the story until President Nixon resigned. So attempts are there, but I think the challenge that is there again is this fear of these political ramifications and so on and so forth. And sometimes people don't want to rattle the establishment, don't want to annoy the politicians and so on and so forth. But I think there's a need for courage to be able to speak out when some of these matters are coming out, so that politicians are made to remember that they're actually ruling because of the people that put them into power.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson. Another question. How do you compare the Zambian media to media in other countries? Isn't it a universal thing that media might be biased? And this question is from Dr. Thomas.
Yes, of course. Yes, of course. I mean, I'll give an example. News Corp. What's the name of the owner of this one of the big media conglomerates? Viacom, owner of Fox News and the other entities. She was actually saying the other time that Fox News in the US, for instance, is the most unbiased news that you'll find. Okay. But you see, when you listen to Fox News, it's always pro-Republican. And you know, the thinking there is that, you see, as long as you are the owner, if I'm running a newspaper, for instance, I'll obviously put in my thoughts, I'll put in my ideas. But you see, I'll be completely oblivion to the fact that my thoughts and my philosophies and my inclinations are actually running through in the particular media. It's a universal thing. And comparing with other countries, of course, I do agree that you know, these matters of control are there everywhere in the world. But the question sometimes is to what extent? I'm not here to make any value judgment as to the state of the media in Zambia, but from my observation, I think there is more that the media could do to do a better job as watchdogs than what is obtaining right now. I think that the media could support government more by ensuring that government understood why it's important for the media to be independent. It's actually for their own good. For instance, in a corporation, the audit department must not be looked at as an enemy. It must be looked at as one that complements, you know, the strategy of the organization. If the audit department did not exist, then the executive will be in trouble, because there are certain times when you're not able to see your back. But when the audit department comes to audit you, they're able to see certain things that you have missed out, you know, in your operation. So the media operates like that as well. I think the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary must be appreciative of the media, so that the media is able to inform them on what the citizens are saying. And in so doing, then the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary is able now to, or they're able to do the correct thing, because at the end of the day, really, they're employed by the people who voted them into power. So really, to answer that question, yes, it's a universal thing, but I think each country has its own uniqueness, its own challenges. I think there's more that a particular country's media fraternity can do to improve on its work, because really we are trying to promote democracy and transparency.
Yeah, and there is one more question. We wish to know if the major concept of the novel, Changing Tides, by Michelle Mulilo of Kitwe. Pardon me for the wrong pronunciation. I would again ask the question. We wish to know if the major concept of the novel, Changing Tides, by Michelle Mulilo of Kitwe, is based on media and the freedom to express on the happenings of the country.
I'll be very honest. I have not read that particular piece. I would need to read it for me to appreciate what the author is talking about. But I'm tempted to think that, you know, when I listen to the title "Changing Tides," I'm tempted to think, but whether it's linked to media or not, I'm not very sure. I'll have to read the book myself. Then I can give a more educated response.
Yeah, just a couple of questions, Dr. Wilson. How Zambia's media to delight people's lifestyle?
Come again, sir?
The question is how Zambia's media to delight people's lifestyle.
How Zambia's media does, there's a word that I'm missing there.
Yeah, media to delight, he says. The question is from Dr. Ramanan. How Zambia's media to delight people's lifestyle? Maybe how it impacts the lifestyle of the people. It could be.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, thank you. You know, I can be very quick to say that one of the challenges that you find, for instance, with media in a polity like ours is that, of course, there's this local media, local newspapers, local television channels, and so on and so forth. But you see, there's a bigger influence that comes from Western media that runs through satellite television, like I indicated. So with passing years, you found that, you see, people would tend to spend more time, say, on television, you know, listening to international news, watching international programming, and less of, you know, local programming. To the extent that generally the lifestyles that you see are impacted more by the Western influence than what is being promoted locally. And if you go back to the presentation on indigenous literature, part of the reason why that book that I was highlighting, Mugandega, was written was to try and encourage people, local people, to appreciate their local culture. So if you ask the question, to what extent does the media impact the lifestyles of the people within the country? The general tendency is that most of the people who read, for instance, newspapers are probably the educated elite. And the people on the street are depending for news, depending on, you know, chats from others, and then they spend most of the time exposing themselves to international news. But the bigger impact that is beginning to be seen on the streets really is the influence of social media. Because on social media, you know, there's less censorship, and people are able to say whatever it is that they want, and they're able to bring out very sensitive things. And what you have seen is that, you see, there will be very little influence from traditional media and more influence from social media. So when something happens, it's talked about more on social media than on traditional media. And because of that, you know, like recently there's been, you know, a very secretive movement among the youth wanting to demonstrate against government and so on and so forth. But I think government was able to discuss with the youth, and I think that whole movement died down. But you see, that movement was building up because of social media, because on social media, control is a bit more difficult and information is shared easily. So I think if you're talking about impacting people's lives, I think social media has a bigger impact on people's lives socially within Zambia than traditional media.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Wilson. And there is the last question. Can you suggest some indigenous novels that are translated to English, and also highlight a few women writers in Zambian literature?
The challenge that we have is that there's a general lack of desire for readership in the country, I'll be honest. And this problem can actually be seen, especially with the coming in of satellite television and also with the influence of social media. Most young people would rather spend their time surfing this and surfing that on social media and not reading books. But one of the books that is of interest to me, that I have read translated from local indigenous writing into English, I think is what book is that? I'm trying to remember it. I read it some time ago. The name has gone. Yeah, I think if I remember it, I'll share it with you, so then you can share it with the listeners. But other books, well, of course, they could have been written in English, but they're really talking about local happenings. Is one of the books that is very interesting is A Night Without a President. The Night Without a President. Basically, this is a story around the First Republic, when it was rumored that the president was overthrown and the chaos that the country went into. And basically that book was trying to champion the agenda of multi-party systems, as opposed to the one-party democracy that we had many years ago. So it was, again, a political statement that was made in that book to suggest that it's about time that Zambia moved on to multi-partyism. But most of the indigenous books are written in local languages.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Wilson. And I'm sorry, this is the last question because the participant is very keen on me asking this question. Are there any agencies or organizations that can hold the blatantly faulting media or the press accountable, like the courts?
Yes, we do have the courts. I mean, the entire court system does exist. There are individuals that have been dragged through the court system and have probably spent time in prison for defamation, for libel, and so on and so forth. Yeah, the court systems do exist. And at one time, just as an example, at one time there was one columnist who was writing a lot of quite some unpalatable things about the president. And then Minister of Information, requested the Attorney General of the country to sue that particular columnist and the newspaper where his columns were appearing. And he went through the court system. But you see, the court dismissed the case because the newspaper and the columnist put the argument that it was satire. The writing was not directly referring to the president, but the writing was satirical. And yet in that satire, basically the columnist was implying the president, but they got away with the fact that it was satire, it wasn't reality. But yes, the court systems do exist, and the people are prosecuted for telling untruths or half-truths and so on and so forth. Yeah, the court systems do exist.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wilson. It was a delight to listen to you, and thank you so much for sharing such valuable inputs and for having made the session a truly a great experience for all of us. Thank you, Dr. Wilson, once again.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Happy evening, sir. Dr. Wilson, sir, happy evening. And all the conveners and respected participants, all the dignitaries. And thank you so much for your valuable presentation, especially as giving your answers and so on. So here we posted the questions both the platform like Zoom as well as the media, as well as the YouTube questions. Thank you for your passion answering all the questions and effective presentation, sir. Thank you so much. To you, Yuvraj, sir.
Yeah, I think the paid presentation sessions would have started, and I request all the presenters to join their respective rooms. Thank you so much.
Hello. Thank you, Professor Yuvraj. For the question which you asked, Dr. Yasmin has posted 2 works in the chat room. One is Kauri of Hope by Binwal Sinyangwe, and another one is Patchwork by Ellen Bande Aku. So she has posted 2 works. I mean, you can inform the audience also. And also yet another work by Dr. Sumati Sripati. She also has posted another work, Deflowered by Mavila, Kafula, Pamila. And thank you both the resource persons, Dr. Yasmin as well as Dr. Sumati Sripati. And they have posted a response for the questions asked.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you, Raj sir, and thank you, Wilson. Professor Collins, shall we close the meeting?
Yes, sir. I'm waiting for your closing note.
Yes.
We can.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Unundal. Thank you, Dr. Yuvraj, for wonderfully moderating both the sessions, because it was a last minute arrangement from Dr. Wilson that Dr. Atta could not join us. So thank you for moderating wonderfully. And at the same time, I have to thank Dr. Wilson, who represented both himself as well as for his wife together in this afternoon session. I also thank Dr. Yasmin and Dr. Sumati Sripati, who have joined us for this session with other resource persons and scholars. Thank you, one and all. Over to Father, Dr. Maria Arukiraj.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so very much. It was a wonderful session. We all really enjoyed listening to, especially the indigenous literatures from Dr. Wilson, especially about the Tonga people. It was really wonderful. And also, as he was just speaking, we were able to compare with our own indigenous traditions here, indigenous symbolism here. It was quite very interesting, and especially the last one, because recently Zambia was on media quite very much for the type of leadership that the country is actually showing the way for the other countries. It was wonderful listening to Dr. Wilson. Thank you, Dr. Wilson, and you made up very well. Though your better half was not present with you, it was wonderful. Thank you so much. It was very good. We had participants from USA as well as from New Zealand also, and they have sent in a lot of appreciation for the type of sessions that we have organized. It was wonderful having you, Doctor. Thank you so much for your very insightful presentation. Congratulations.